What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Engine25 YouTube channel. Always happy to have you. Today we're going to be talking about The Witcher. So I just hope everybody has had a safe holiday and you are taking your masking and virus precautions seriously. I've had some relatives get it, and it's not a good time, and nobody people just want to have a good time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you like this, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and let's go ahead and get started. I am, of course, back today with my my good friend Katy. How are you doing today, Katy?
I'm good. Thank you. How are you doing, Brandon?
I'm doing all right. I my ankle's getting better. I don't know if I told you uh an earlier episode I mentioned that I had fallen down the stairs at work. Had my first PT appointment yesterday. Uh it's going to be a challenge, but it's,
Well,
walking.
I'm glad it wasn't worse than it was.
Me too. No broken bones. Um Appreciate that. How's your holiday? How you been?
It was good. Had a good time with some of the fam. Um, you know, my brother was supposed to come out, but other family got sick, so we all just tried to
Yeah,
be cautious.
there's a lot of that going around.
Yeah, I have a 6-year-old niece, so we didn't want to give it to her. So,
Absolutely not.
you know, another COVID Christmas, but it was certainly better than 2020. So.
Absolutely. And it ended up, relatives got it right before I found out, 21st, 22nd. So like Christmas Day was just me and my wife together, and we sat and we watched Encanto, and we hadn't seen Raya and the Last Dragon yet either. We checked them both out on Disney Plus, and it was really nice.
Well, that's a
They're
nice
both really
day.
good, by the way, if you haven't seen them.
I haven't actually.
Yeah, yeah. Of
Yikes.
But we're of course here to talk about The Witcher season
Yes.
2 on Netflix. Um, I was for the most part a fan of the first season. I thought it made had some speed bumps, but I do adore Henry Cavill, as we have well established on the show. Um, so but interesting reversal maybe. Generally, I have a lot of background knowledge on topics that I pick for the show, and today I have neither read The Witcher or really spent any significant time with any of the video games. So most of that background kind of stuff is going to come from Katy.
My
And
destiny is being fulfilled. This is
indeed,
all I was meant to do.
I hope it's not all you were meant to do. You're going somewhere, being a film scholar, an educator, and
Ooh,
you're gonna change lives one day.
hope so. Hope so.
But
But for now,
before we touch on the show, what was your experience with The Witcher before? Like, had you before the first season? Had you played the games? Had you read anything, or did you read because of that? Or let's talk me through it.
so The Witcher season 1 came out in December of 2019.
2 years ago. Two
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah. So I thought it looked really cool. My friend David Jackson, who is a big fan of the books and the games, had told me that they were making his favorite thing into a Netflix series. And I was like, oh, well, all right, that sounds cool. That sounds really, like nerdy fantasy kind of stuff, which I do like, but I was, finishing up my thesis at the time. So I was like, I
Right,
can't even
and
think
that
about it.
was a thing, based on the general knowledge, because I play video games. I haven't played the Witcher
Mhm.
games, but I'm aware of them, and uh, and it seemed a little, even being a big fan of like Lord of the Rings and Dungeons and Dragons. I wasn't sure the Witcher would be for me because it's like a really
Mhm.
it's a really specific thing, as
Yeah.
opposed to, it's not classical fantasy, which is kind of my thing, which isn't a problem.
Mhm.
It was just different, and I wasn't sure at first that I would be into it.
So it's definitely its own thing. And that's the thing that I've kind of discovered most about it is that people have their different interpretations of things, but the creators of the games kind of lent itself to that by the game's really extensive use of choice by the player. Um,
By
but
the way, quick, I'm sorry to interrupt. We know that Katie's camera's glitching out. There wasn't much we can do,
no.
so we're just gonna roll with it. I'm sorry. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
sorry, just listen.
Yeah, it's all good.
If it bothers you, just listen. Um, So anyway, the first season came out December 2019. I'd heard a little bit about it from my friend David, and I decided to watch it. I thought it looked really good, and I thought the casting was really good, and I was excited to see what Henry Cavill would do with it. And the rest of the cast I didn't know yet, except for, oh, I forget her name, but Calanthe had also had a small part in Game of Thrones. So I was like, all right, I see the parallels. Sorry.
And
Um,
maybe I was a little afraid it would try to be Game of Thrones, and you can't try to be Game of Thrones. It doesn't
no, you
work for
can't.
anyone else. Yeah.
But I think that the Witcher showrunner, Lauren Schmidt Hissrich, I don't agree with all of her decisions, but I agree with her vision. And I really appreciate the fact that she knows it cannot and will not be Game of Thrones. But The Witcher is so much of its own thing, having a precedent of games and books, that they have this space to fill with something that's a little bit different, but still nostalgic of that genre, right? It evokes those similar kinds of dramatic themes and a kind of medieval world that's different from our own. So I saw the first series or the first season, and I thought it was awesome. I loved it. I was really looking forward to the second season, but I didn't know anything about gaming at that point. I'm still, you know, for lack of a better term, a noob. I'm st-
I wouldn't call myself a noob, but I'm a filthy casual. So you're in good company.
so I didn't really have any inclination to play the game. I thought it would be cool to play it, but I was very intimidated by that whole world and kind of starting something that big. Cut to 2020, the world went to shit, in case you didn't know.
Yeah, I hadn't noticed.
And I really, this is, it's just so weird. A few months before that, I had said to my brother, like, I need a Blu-ray player. I'm gonna have to go get one. We were just chatting. And he said, I'll send you my Xbox. I don't use it anymore. My brother is a huge gamer. And I was like, great, I'm just gonna use it for my Blu-rays.
It hurts me deeply that he was so willing to part with his Xbox, but that's a conversation for another podcast as to why.
He was fully on the PC train. So he was like,
Okay, so
take it.
and I'm a PlayStation guy too, but they've
Right.
PlayStation has been doing much better than Xbox up until this the last couple of years. Anyway,
Right. So anyway, he's a PC guy, and he was like, here, take it. So I was happened to be in possession of a perfectly wonderful gaming console. And my brother had moved out waiting to start his new job and was with us in Arizona. And so I said, you know what? It's lockdown. This video of Henry Cavill making his own PC just came out, and now I really kind of want to play this game. And I already
spoiler
know
alert:
a little bit
Hen-
about it.
Henry Cavill's a huge dork.
Yeah, in case you didn't know. But I hate how in all of his interviews now they just ask him about the same thing over and over again, and he has the same answer to every nerdy question over and over again. And that's not his fault. Like, ask better questions. But anyway, um, so I knew the series. I knew a little bit about the plot of the games a little bit, or at least a third. And I asked my brother, and I said, do I need to start with the first one? And he said, no, just hop right into the third. And I was like, all right, cool. So he got me all set up with The Witcher on my Xbox. And when I tell you I played the shit out of that game, I wish my Xbox still worked. I mean, I would love to go on and see how many hours I've logged on the Xbox on that game, but
You can probably find out online.
it's on my brother's
Yeah.
account. So
Okay.
maybe, but anyway, it would be an exorbitant amount of hours. And I mean, when I tell you that discovering gaming and playing The Witcher got me through quarantine, I really mean it. Like, I was going through a really tough time of, everything was online and I was having to adapt to teaching online. And teaching an entirely new class that I hadn't taught before, and finishing my thesis and being ready to graduate with my master's and wondering what the future would be like. I mean, I was going through a lot in addition to the COVID and the quarantine. So I really like gaming became my therapy. You know, it became my thing to do so that I didn't have to think about other stuff. And I loved it. And being an entertainment person and a storytelling person, I was like, this is wonderful. And I can really actually appreciate the development of this game. And I see the detail and I see how they've built it. And I just loved it. So I invested a lot of time into the games and then on audiobook listened to the main series of books. I didn't listen to the prequels.
How
I
many
listened to the
books is that?
Oh my God. I just built myself up as like a Witcher nerd. And now I'm like, how many books are there? I think it's like 4 or 5
Okay.
in the main series. And I never finished the last one because quite honestly, it was extremely boring.
That's
And I
unfortunate.
feel that way about all of them. I understand that they were written in Polish. And so having it translated into English is going to have some differences in, just the way that it's portrayed.
Right.
So I get that, but it's very boring. Not a lot happens, and that can't be changed because it's
Noted.
plot. It's
Yeah.
not really a translation problem at that point. It's plot. And while you can analyze for plot structure and rising action and falling action and all that kind of good stuff, and I just don't see it as easily in these books. And so the books, and Lauren Schmidt Historic has talked about this while promoting the second season. The books, especially Blood of Elves, the first one that they're adapting here in season 2, that book is very character development heavy, very journey, like emotional journey heavy. It's a lot about the characters developing relationships with each other. So there's not a lot of action. And if there's one
I was
thing,
going to say you're not saying things that are problems if you're asking me, but
right, but there's not a lot of action. And if there's one thing you want to see on screen from something like The Witcher, it's a lot of action. And to be fair, knowing what I know about what happens in the books and the game is obviously very action heavy, but um yeah, I would also be very angry if I didn't get to see Henry Cavill slicing up some people or things in this season. And to be fair, I understand that it was hard to adapt this second season, the Blood of Elves book, but I wanted there to be more fighting. And they tried to put fighting in there and it kind of like didn't work. We can talk about the whole Eskel thing later, what they did to my boy.
I had read that and for because I haven't mentioned it yet, um I have not read The Witcher and I said I haven't played the video games, but I haven't read the novels. And apparently Eskel's a big deal and he
Yeah.
it doesn't happen the same way in the show as it did in the novel.
So I guess that's the first thing we can touch on since we brought it up and it's kind of like the
Okay,
biggest
and
complaint.
on that note, before I let you continue, I'm going to throw the spoiler thing. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, good call. So in season 2, episode 2, Eskel freaking dies and he's turned into a Leshen. So
Alessian is
that's a
the tree
huge
the tree creature.
yes.
Okay.
Yes, the tree creature thing in the games and I think in the books too, but especially in the games, it's touched on that Alessian is a post-conjunction creature. So it was dumped into this world of The Witcher during the conjunction of the spheres, and so it's in the game it's called a uh, relict. Relict, yes. So it's like an ancient being, right? And
Okay.
there's only so many of them, like Henry Cavill so graciously states in some exposition in this season. So Eskel in the games Witcher 3 takes place years after the events of what we're watching on the Netflix series right now.
Okay.
And even in the books, Eskel definitely doesn't die. He's got this whole whole story and this backstory of how he himself also had a child surprise. Spoiler. And it was a princess, and they did not have a good relationship. So it's kind of contrasted to the Geralt Ciri relationship. And
Okay.
it's this whole thing. And so David was texting me, my dear friend, David Jackson, and he had watched the first 4 episodes before me.
Okay.
And so I was kind of live texting him as I was watching the first 4 episodes. And I was like, oh my God, my boy. Like, yeah, he's a little weird, but I'm just really looking forward to seeing how they use that whole backstory from the books of Eskel's child surprise princess relationship and like how they use that going forward for the character development that's bound to
The
happen
answer
due to the
is
nature of this book.
the
And
answer
then
is
20
they
minutes
don't.
later, he's dead.
Yeah.
And so
Excellent.
I called David. He was like, yeah, when you sent that to me, I cringed. So I couldn't believe that they didn't use that opportunity to, kind of delve into that child surprise kind of, I don't want to say trend, but happening and how it happens for both those Witchers. On the flip side, I can understand how they would definitely want to keep that as kind of like a sacred relationship in this series and how that is Geralt and Ciri's thing.
That's
She's the
fair.
child
And
surprise.
the law of surprise is confusing enough. It didn't make sense to me until I read up on it online. You know what I mean? So it's like, and maybe I wasn't paying attention or what have you, but it's a weird cultural thing that exists in this world that is apparently an age old tradition
Yeah.
that how's it work if you save someone's life, they can claim the law of surprise, which is what generally means that the person who was saved owes something major to the person who did the saving. Most
Right.
often, it's that person's firstborn child.
Well, it doesn't have to be.
It
That's
does
the
not have to
thing.
be, but
Right.
according to the wiki, it's most often.
But
Yeah,
somehow it usually ends up being a child.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah, it really does. So the law of surprise is basically like, I did this thing for you, which is like, it's a big deal. So the way that they equate it and usually talk about it is it through saving somebody's life,
life for a
and
life situation.
yeah, kind of. Um, but in the first season, they talk about how it could be a bumper crop or, a newborn pup or something like that. So if I came home and I found, a surprise package at my door and I had owed somebody something a lot of surprise at that time, I'd be like, oh, well, sorry, here's this package. And that would be their payment. Probably wouldn't be anything great, but you never know. So, um, but in the case of the Witcher world, it's usually a kid for some reason. And so Eskel also has a story like that in the books. And so I feel like fans think that the Eskel character wasn't necessary to sacrifice off, especially when they made so many other Witcher characters to like populate Kaer Morhen in this season. And I can understand that as a fan. Yes, I'm disappointed I don't get to see anything else from Eskel, but
Were
as
those
the
other
showrunner has,
were those other witchers in the novel? I know Vesemir is. What about all the other guys?
there's a couple of others, but definitely not that many.
Okay.
There's Vesemir, Cohen, Lambert, Eskel, and like 2 or 3 others. But the fact that I can't remember their names, there's one that's like training to be a Witcher, but they can't make him a Witcher because they don't have the stuff, right? But he ends up dying. Don't remember his name. But those are the main ones:
Right.
Cohen, Lambert, Eskel, Geralt, Vesemir. So like 5. And then in the games, The Witcher 3, the only ones left are Eskel, Lambert, Geralt, and Vesemir from the School of the Wolf. So with that few Witchers, I definitely understand as a fan. I was like, what the hell? Like, Eskel is kind of important. But to be fair to Lauren Schmidt Hisrick's credit, she is correct when she has said Eskel doesn't do a whole lot in the books. He really doesn't. It's not important in the books. In the games, yes. Books, no. And they're not adapting the games. They're using it as inspiration and partnership, but they're adapting the books. And that's really important to remember. So I understand from a development and adaptation point where that's coming from. But from a fan standpoint of the games, I'm like, oh, that's my boy. He said, and the thing is that Eskel as a character was kind of flipped up too, and they meant to do it, but it wasn't successful. I will say outright, I have no problem saying that what they were trying to do with Eskel did not come across on screen. So, how did he come across to you, Brandon, as somebody that doesn't have all that backstory? What was your first impressions of the Eskel character?
He we don't get a lot of time with him, like, if I'm honest, so it was hmm. I mean, it's obvious that he and Geralt are old friends. Um, but I could say that about any of the Witchers. You know, they haven't been able to make a Witcher in some time, so all of these guys have known each other for however long, and they're all, no, their Witchers live longer than humans, so they've all, they've all known each other for decades. So it's, I
Yeah.
mean, and I don't. It's hard to say what is Eskel. Like, is he a party boy? He brings sex workers to the castle. And I don't. It's hard to say if that was an Eskel thing or if that was an effect of he's infected with this Leshy disease and he's
Yeah.
not behaving right. Um,
Yeah.
but even Geralt points out like something's not right about you like almost immediately. So
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I maybe I didn't feel like we had much to go on. He shows up midway through episode 2 and he's dead by midway through episode 3. So it's or maybe it's earlier than that. Maybe if I'm not
He
remembering.
shows up at the beginning of episode 2 and is
Okay.
dead by like
Is
middle end
dead
of
by the end.
episode
Okay,
2.
yeah, cuz that they get to Kaer Morhen at the beginning of episode 2.
Mm-hmm.
And then okay, so yeah, so everything is
Yeah.
you spend less than an hour with him.
Yeah. And I think that is exactly why it doesn't work. Because like I love that you pointed out, like, is it because he doesn't feel good? Because he's infected with this lesson, which is also weird. Like I've never heard of that happening in the Witcher universe ever.
Neither have Geralt and Vesemir for what it's worth.
Right. um, so yeah, the Askel character in the books and in the games is much more well-tempered. He's a really nice guy. Like Askel is just the one that you like want on your side. He's very much like a big brother to Ciri, as is Lambert, but Lambert's actually like more of the asshole, in my opinion. We kind of get that in this season,
Lambert
in
was
season
like the
2.
red-haired guy that took her to the obstacle course that
Yeah,
kicked her ass every day, right? Yeah, okay.
yeah, that's Lambert. Um, so it made me really sad that we never got to see any of that really wholesome character of Eskel besides being in that flashback in episode 3, which even then he's just like complaining and being like a little bitch about being a witcher. Like I was like, that's like they have beef with like and like trauma of being witchers, but it didn't feel right to me. So we never really got to understand Eskel pre-Leshen infection. And so all of that stuff that he was doing.
Okay, and he is not he is not in the first season, right?
No, no,
Yeah, because I had a thought at one point that it was just someone that I didn't remember, but yeah, so he's not in the first season at all. Okay,
not in the first season at all. So, everything that he's doing when he, comes up to Ciri and taunts her and, bringing the prostitutes and the Kaer Morhen and all of that is a result of his infection taking over or him trying to fight it. And, so from that standpoint, I don't think that that works at all, especially because as a viewer, you said you were confused as to who this guy is and what he's about.
I mean,
And
there
I
just
totally
wasn't that
understand.
much to him, like I
Yeah.
felt like I got what I needed to know, and it's that he's a Witcher and they're old friends, and he seems like Geralt might be closer to this guy than some of the other ones, but that's all that they give us.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
And I think that's a real shame. I think they could have, I know they need to move the story along and they only have 8 episodes. 8.
yeah.
Yeah. But still, uh, for me, even in an adaptation and the pacing of the show, it just didn't feel right to me. I know they wanted to shock. I just don't think that they had to do it that way. And
Well,
it felt
if you're
rushed.
going to shock, it should shock people who are fans and who are new. It should
Yeah.
not be a question mark to people who know better. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Like I was waiting for like, the adaptation of his story. And I wanted to talk about the very nature of that word adaptation, because
Please.
at least for me, an adaptation of anything, of a book, a video game, or taking one thing from one medium to another, you really do have to adapt, which means,
I am
change your
of
plan according to circumstances.
I
So,
agree, and I am of the belief, and we touched on this a little bit during the pre-show, but you should tell your story in the medium that most effectively says what you want to say. You know,
mhm,
and not to say that certain stories can work in multiple mediums. That's why we have successful film adaptations. But
mhm,
for if it works best in a novel, you should write a novel, and maybe it should stay a novel. Maybe we could make a movie. Maybe that movie's good. But if The Witcher has a whole series of video games,
mhm.
maybe I think some stories have a they are told stronger than they could have in other mediums because the user is so involved with it, if that makes sense. So you could
Yeah.
the user in the case of The Witcher's an RPG, the player can make choices that change how the story goes. You can
Mhm.
also take the flip side of that. A game like The Last of Us it's a single player linear story, but the player is forced to be involved in some choices that are at times really uncomfortable,
Mm.
and that can it's done that way on purpose, if that makes any sense to you. So like if
Yeah.
or I'm sorry, and by that I mean, if I hope I've explained it clearly, clearly enough to get what I'm trying to say. It's
Yeah.
the
It's the story. It's the plot of
Yes,
the game.
and in that case, in the case of a video game, the player's involvement should be a key to it, where you don't have that in a movie or a TV series, but you have
Mhm.
other things that are strong in a visual medium versus a textual medium.
Yeah. And I do also want to point out, just so you know, that The Witcher 1 and 2 and 3, but we've already kind of talked about that. I mean, CD Projekt Red didn't adapt the stories of the books at all. They came up with their own stories. So they had rights to the characters, and they used the world building that Andrei Sapkowski had done in the novels, but they didn't adapt those stories into the games. They came up with entirely new things. So it's not like we've seen these stories that the Netflix series are using adapted before, because they
Right.
haven't been.
Okay, that's cool. I didn't The Witcher 3 is called Wild Hunt, right? And
Hmm.
there are a couple of times in this season where someone mentions the Wild Hunt. So that seems like
Hmm.
a kind of an important thing that's going to come up later on, but
Yeah. The Wild Hunt also does come up in Blood of Elves, which is the book that they were adapting here. So it's definitely more recognizable because the third game is literally called The Wild Hunt, and it has to do all with the Wild Hunt. So that imagery is really recognizable. But in terms of adaptation, I've heard fans complain that what the writers have done is just their own fan fiction. I understand how they get to
you
that.
it sounds like you could say the same thing about the video games, and people love those.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Thank you. Exactly. So I understand like how they get to, where the story is not exactly like what Blood of Elves is. They're also trying to incorporate, a grain of truth, which is from the prequels. It's a short story from the prequels that they adapted into the plot of the season. So
Okay.
the very first episode is that story.
With
And
the
with
the Beauty and the Beast guy
yes,
who's it he's Christopher Heavey,
from Game of Thrones.
yeah, from Game of Thrones, the Tormund Giantsbane.
Yes, yeah, love him. Love his performance in that
Uh,
too.
and that I almost don't want to have to say that might be my favorite episode of of the whole season, but
I mean, honestly, maybe me too. But
yeah.
um I don't think that they would be mad about that though, the showrunners and the folks in the show. I think that that's a fair assessment because it was done so well.
Right.
But um anyway, so I understand how fans are seeing the plot that was put forth as being fan fiction, but it's not just that, it's an adaptation. They have the main core drive of the story, and they had to incorporate Yennefer more into that story for the season because she's a main character. It's Yennefer, Geralt, and Ciri. Ciri being the main character. Um, but they had to bring Yennefer back in because in the book, Yennefer is barely there, and Geralt like writes her a letter, and that's pretty much it.
And this is in the first novel?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Interesting.
So, they really had to get her back in there because after the Battle of Sodden, which is discussed in the prequels and
Right.
not Blood of Elves, she actually goes blind from using all of that power. So
Okay,
it's a physical.
she's
Like,
run out of
actually blind.
magic basically because she created this giant fireball that ended the war, that ended the battle. But
And
so she's
as
blind from
Yennefer
it.
in the
in the
other
novel.
books is describing, teaching Ciri how to do magic, there's a whole thing about how fire magic is very, very dangerous and it is illegal,
The fire
basically.
fuck.
Yeah, it's illegal to tap into that fire magic, which is why Riance, the firefucker, is such a kind of like hated character from that perspective, especially because Yennefer, knowing what it can do, has just lost her magic. So in this series, in the season, Yennefer has metaphorically lost her sight, right? By losing her powers, as she did in the book, but it's definitely more of a metaphorical thing, right? She's off her path. Yennefer would never really actually try and like hurt Ciri or, do something like that to Geralt, but she's desperate. So she's, her disparity has blinded her. So in the book, she actually goes off and like Istred rehabs her for a while and she eventually gains her sight back. And then she gets a letter from Geralt that's like, hey, I've got this magical child surprise. Help me. And she's like, all right. So they had to bring her back in. It's the nature of the medium. You have your main characters and it's the nature of the genre, right? You've got your witch, you got your monster slayer, and you've got your princess.
In film school, we talked briefly about especially in movies, less so in novels because you generally have more room to mess around with with other people. But I've heard it called economy of character. And that's, in 2 hours, and we're talking about movies at the time. This is a TV series, so you have, more breathing room, even so. But, there's only a certain number of names that people can remember. So that's why the nature of adaptations, sometimes they take 2 or 3 people from a novel and they make it one person, or, this and that. There are ways to. You have your warrior, your mage, and your princess, so that's. And everyone else is additional. Vesemir
and your bard. Sorry.
Yes, Yaskier, and then no disappointment for me. No catchy new songs from Yaskier this season. Nothing that stuck in my head. At least he had that one performance.
I know,
but
they can't live back up to that. I thought
true.
they did a good
Toss a
job,
coin
but
to your Witcher. But
classic.
Yeah, and then Vesemir is like the old grumpy teacher
wise
guy.
old man. Yeah.
But we don't spend a lot of time with either of them because it's about the warrior and the princess.
And so they have to bring those characters back in. So that's why they developed that is why they developed the storyline for Yennefer this season, right? They took the essence of what was in the book. She loses her sight and her powers and brought that into, all right, so this happened to her. She's not actually blind because we have to see her eyes. Like that's a thing. Like on film, it doesn't.
Eyes.
It's a moot point if you can't see their eyes.
Purple contacts.
Yeah. And so, they bring her back for that reason, and they take that root of the story, just as they did for every other character, basically. And, put it into a cohesive story arc, an 8-episode story arc. I think it works as an adaptation. I understand how people get angry about that. But at least from an adaptation point of view, knowing what I know about, the lore and the detail, I'm fine. I'm like, great, good job, very inventive, very creative, which you have to be to adapt something or even attempt to adapt something like The Witcher. So I thought they did a great job. I appreciate Henry Cavill having the knowledge of it that he has, specific lines that he told them to add in and things that he made sure were nodded
And
to, which I think is very smart.
I appreciate that he, being the character that we see the most, he still doesn't talk much, and he has a lot more to talk about this season. Series
Mhm.
with him the whole time. He's not a loner, but like in the first season, with exception, it was mostly like someone tries to talk to him and he gives like a succinct dismissal or a curse word and then just walks away.
Well, I actually know that on the first season, sometimes he, there was stuff written and he just wouldn't and he would just react. And
All right,
I
I
think
like it.
that's great. And as he's been with the character, he's understood more of what he wants, excuse me, what he wants to do. And,
And a lot of, to be
now
fair,
that
a lot of
he,
that stuff is before this too. Like, in fact,
Mhm.
is it all of it?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So he's grown up over time. He's
Yeah.
a lot more complicated of a person than he was when we first meet him, and he kills the spider monster. So
Yeah. Oh yeah, the Kikimora. Yes.
that one, yes.
And now he's got Siri, so he actually has to communicate with her, and he's at home at Kaer Morhen. Of course, he's going to be more open, and so I appreciate those character development details and the different situations, but also, as an actor, as he's been able to tap into it and assess, I think that's great. So yes, he talks more this season. And he had made a choice last season to kind of reserve him back a little bit. And I think that's fine too. I think it all works.
Does he talk a lot in the novels? Or can you choose to make him talk a lot in the novel? I mean, not in the novels. Yeah, well, in the novels and in the games. Does he talk a
And the
lot?
novels, Geralt is actually a really funny guy.
Okay.
like like he's got some really good one-liners, and there's this, I don't want to spoiler alert. We have spoiler alert up,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, please.
So um uh there's this whole plot in one of the books, throughout them. He's not actually a knight of Rivia, but then eventually this thing happens and he fights and he actually gets made Sir, Geralt of Rivia by the Queen. And he's like freaking out about it. And he's like, oh my God. And the way that it's going on in his head is just like he's like fanboying out about it. And then
I can't see that based on what
I
the Henry
know, I
Cavill
know,
version.
right? And so
Like,
then
it
he
seems
actually
like
goes on like,
he would be more annoyed that he would have to show up for this than anything else. Like,
well, it was kind of like impromptu on the battlefield. So it's not
okay,
like it was an actual ceremony. Um, and like Queen Maeve, who you see at the end of the season, she's the
right.
one that does that. And that'll be in the series eventually, right? But and then she actually like had teeth knocked out and she's like lisping through it. And it's like hilarious. And so Garrett's just like, I can't believe this is happening. And then he goes on like some kind of like power trip bender where he's like, I'm Sir Geralt of Rivia, and like Dandelion Yaskier gets like
Yes,
really
yeah.
annoyed with it, and it's a whole thing. So Geralt in the books has more of a sense of humor. He's definitely more human, and he has a little bit more personality, but that's really shown in like intimate moments or through um, an omniscient narrator or whoever's perspective it's from, which can be Geralt's, So that makes sense to me. Um, or I'm sorry, whose perspective, not omniscience. So in the books, he has more personality and you get to know a lot more about his inner thoughts,
Right.
but that's the medium, right? In the games, he has to talk a lot. He has to because he
Is
delivers
there an
all of the
option
information for
to
you.
like not respond? That's what something I really like about, after telling you all these things about how I don't play RPGs. Like, I have played through back in college. I played through the Mass Effect trilogy, um, and there's always an option to just not say anything.
Mhm.
Um,
You can close out a conversation in The
yeah, yeah.
Witcher 3. You
Oh,
can. And you can just say, all right, whatever. But it's also more like ignoring a quest
right.
too. And it's like,
Okay.
not my problem, which, kind
With
of
Mass Effect, people, after if you don't answer or you go a couple of times without responding, people are like, so are you just not going to talk? Like, people point it out eventually sometimes, depending on who you're talking to. But
right. No, I haven't come across that in all of my Witcher 3 gaming time.
yeah,
But
I'm just curious, and it's because it's weird to me to think about Geralt talking a lot because Henry Cavill doesn't, and then
yeah.
at least not with people he's not certainly not with people he's not close to. We get some really nice moments with Vesemir, and like I almost welled up when the Ciri's sitting there bleeding, and he's like, "No, like you are enough, and you don't need to be any more than you are."
No.
And it's yeah, you're
The Daddy Geralt vibes, and I don't mean that in any like gross way, but like literally the Daddy Geralt vibes,
and I won't
the
judge you if you mean
interactions
it in a
with
gross way too, but
the well, yeah. But the it's so wholesome. And I love seeing that kind of healthy relationship like that
yeah, and
on
he's still
screen.
he's the same character that we've he's older and he's crotchety and he's like not clean, but he's just a good old dad. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I just love how that's okay to be both. And that's
Yeah,
like the whole thing with her, with Siri in the season. They comment on it. She's like, I can fight and wear a dress. And he's like, yeah, I know. Because he's doing the same thing.
yeah.
He's
It's
like,
like
I can
you
fight
don't
and
have to
I can
prove it
wear
to
it.
me, and you keep trying to prove it to me, and I don't need you to do that. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's done so well. And there's definitely, I mean, and the nature of the games too, right? Talking about the medium, adapting for the medium. Geralt talks so much in the games because he has to.
right?
I mean, he tells you all the exposition. You have to have conversations
Does
with
he talk to
people.
himself a lot?
He does sometimes. There's this whole Henry Cavill said he's wanted to throw out some of the one-liners that are generated for Geralt, like just like, to improv it. And he's like, that would be such a disservice to Doug. I think his last name's Cockle. Yeah. The voice actor for Geralt in the video game.
Right.
He's like, that'd be such a disservice to him. That is his thing. Like, I've already taken over the look, like the low voice of the character. Like, I can't do any more than that. So Geralt will talk to himself and just say something like, looks like rain, winds howling. So, and
I mean, that's pretty typical for you'll find for video game type stuff.
right. And then it's just all these other little one things and like interactions he has. There's a whole quest where you have to get on a boat with Yennefer and they have a whole conversation together that you can't do anything about. There's no options, right? It's just, it, it's triggered.
It's
So,
the cutscene.
yeah, it's not even a cutscene. It's just happens. It's just there. As they're riding a boat, and another scene, not even a cutscene, just writing about him and Lambert, and he just goes, Lambert, what a prick. It's like they're talking about
Excellent.
writing poetry. It's hilarious and love it. But it's the medium. He has to talk, so you have to take into account every medium. And we have so many for this world that I can understand how people will get confused and cross them over in their minds, because we've got books, we've got video games, and now we have a TV series. That's a lot.
And they're all different, and they're all not necessarily adapting the same stories, but it's all coming
Right.
from the same sort. There are.
Yeah.
I would you say that how does the look of the show compare to the games, and then how you picture things as you read? That you personally.
I would say I didn't really have, and I think this is part of why I had such a hard time getting into the books, right?
Okay.
Even just listening to it, I was listening on Audible, which I love to do, right? I love a good audiobook. So that's not a new
Right.
medium for me to listen to. When I'm reading something or read listening to something, I see it in my head like a film,
Oh, me
like a
too.
storyboard,
Totally.
right? And that's very visceral for me. And I didn't
Absolutely.
get that from the books very well, because I just didn't find the description there. I couldn't get the visual in my head from from the writing and the action. I just couldn't. It was really hard.
Right.
Um, the games, though, are absolutely stunning. They're beautiful and they're so immersive and so detailed that when I had gone from seeing the first season and then playing the game, I was like, oh my God, like this looks a lot better than what I saw in the first season. And like I understand that. They spend a lot of time in woods and landscapes and different places in the first season.
That's true.
So I I was really impressed by the second season's use of the game visuals as inspiration. Because, there's no secret that they've partnered and had a good working relationship with CD Projekt Red, who developed
Right.
the game.
Absolutely.
No secret. They're like, yes, they had a whole Witcher con together, And I definitely see how in the second season, with a bigger budget and more time, which may or may not have, been a hindrance or a blessing because of COVID, but they definitely had more time to work on things. Um, it looks so good. Kaer Morhen looks so, it's almost identical
Oh yeah.
to the game. And it was really, really cool as somebody who loves the games and who has invested so much into that.
Right.
Like I said, playing The Witcher 3 through quarantine and COVID really helped my mental health. So seeing something like that come back to life in a different medium so well, I was so happy with it. I was like, it even kind of looks like they have this fast travel signpost like outside of Kaer Morhen. Like it was so
Excellent.
cute. And I just really appreciated how they knew that was going to be a big location for fans. And I can understand how they invested a lot of um, resources into making sure that set was really good. And I think that was smart of them to use that set for the basis of the entire season and bringing the finale back there because it's done so well. That's where they really put their money
I
this
agree.
season. Even the kind of like revamped Sintra sets looked good to me too. We don't see Sintra in the game, but you can get an idea for kind of what it would look like based on other things. So I thought it was really good. And I was just really, really touched at how seriously they took that. And even with the music, I don't remember the name of the composer for the soundtrack or the score, but having played the games so much as I have, I definitely recognize the Kaer Morhen theme from that map
Right.
in the game make its way into the show, specifically when Ciri, picks her bedroom and is kind of like resigned to that room and she sits on the bed and just kind of sits there for a moment. Like it's the Kaer Morhen theme, almost identical from the game. And so just those nods like that and the look of it, I thought was really effective. Not only for me, I have a different thing that I'm looking out for. I'm like, oh, that looks like the little signpost, and I hear that theme and stuff like that, But like,
Oh yeah.
I can imagine that as a first time uh, guest of Kaer Morhen, if you will, that set was probably really interesting to watch unfold as a viewer. What was your impression of that?
I think it's Kaer Morhen's probably the most fleshed out location in the show in the series thus
Yeah.
far, and it's um reminded me of like the dragon cultists, whatever what they're called in Skyrim when you go up the mountain. It's
Oh, I don't know.
yeah, yeah. So secluded, and I love a good snowy castle. Um but inside it's especially in the big uh like dining hall, like it's warm and it's homey.
Mm.
And they eat every meal under that big tree where all the Witcher medallions are hanging. And it's
Mhm.
so that is, I don't know if it's that way in other places, but it was really um how do I want to say? It's really evocative that they know what they are, they know what where they know where they come from,
Mhm.
um, and it's did the Witchers build the castle or did they like take it? Do you know?
I'm pretty sure that they ended up not taking it, but it was at one point built by somebody else.
Okay,
I'm not sure. Um, Somebody with a little bit more knowledge in the prequels and
okay,
the lore would know. But the Witchers have been there for a very, very long time.
right,
So uh it's essentially, nobody's gonna take it from them, or, it's been attacked for sure, but
right,
nobody's
and
gonna
it's kind of
dispute
hard to
that it's
reach too. It's up on top of a mountain,
yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah, it's I
Um,
liked how much time we spent there, and we keep talking about Sintra, and we go to Sintra for 3 minutes, and then we never go back. You know what I mean? So it's
yeah.
the um yeah, it was a nice home in it's like a D&D thing almost where
Mhm,
you find the place where you're going to camp out and then you go on your mission and you always go back to the castle. You know what I mean? So it's
mhm.
um in that regard it was really homey to me and I liked like I said I really liked that they every night they eat dinner under the tree with like it's basically dog tags of all the
Yeah.
witchers that have died doing what witchers do. You know what I mean?
Oh, I'm glad that that was really effective, because the medallion tree is actually something that they came up with for the show.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So I'm glad that it was effective. And I think it does kind of bring back in that naturey kind of feel of the Blue Mountains where Kaer is.
Right.
Um, but that Great Hall is, it's a very similar kind of feeling to the set from the video game. It's not the same, and it's a little colder, a little harder, a little grosser,
A little
and
grosser.
a little grosser in the show. In the games and in the books, it's described as being pretty run down. It's been
Okay.
attacked. They can't really repair it. Um, and I think the visuals, talking about the visual medium of the television series uses that well to show you it's not a great place, but it's
But
home.
it's home.
It
Yeah.
works for them,
That's
you know? Uh, so I think they did that really well using the medium that they had, and just the way that they know what they're, people are mad about some of it, and I get it, but it's not okay to claim that the showrunners and the people that make the show don't understand their source material. They understand the source material better than anybody except the author. And the author has given his stamp of approval on it. So that's good
it's
enough for
just
me.
different, you know, and that's
Yeah.
it's an adaptation.
And that's, the root of the word is to adapt, to change, to, you know, bend to, constraints. And constraint isn't a negative word. It's literally just these are the circumstances, So
Budgets.
I,
Budgets are a
I,
thing.
yeah.
And honestly, like I think The Witcher has dealt with its modest TV budget, which is, to be fair,
Mhm.
higher than most TV series get because it's Netflix. Like
Yeah.
I think they deal with it pretty well. Like I thought Christopher Hivju looked great. In the first, it was I couldn't not think of him as the Beast, but
Yeah.
you know, it's very evocative. His look is very evocative of that. But like, I absolutely adored that first episode. What did you
Yeah.
What did you think of the season overall? Because I think it started really strong, and then
Mhm.
I think it kind of dropped off and improved right up until Geralt and Yennefer reunited, which
Mhm.
was a terrible episode.
Oh
Yeah,
no.
it was just is that I mean, and maybe it was intentionally so, but like it didn't seem like a big deal that they were back together.
It was like the mid-season like filler
Yeah, it was like
episode.
5 or 6 or something.
Yeah.
And then the last 2 are just, all right, here's what to look forward to next year.
Yeah.
You know, so like overall, I think it was just fine. But there are some great performances here, and I love every scene with Geralt and Ciri. Um, it's interesting that you tell me that Ciri's the main character of the whole mess, so that'll be cool.
I told you that before we started.
Yeah,
I was like, no. Yeah,
And
Siri's the
then
main
there's
character.
there's some interesting stuff going on with the elves, but like we didn't get enough
Mhm.
of it that I feel really invested in it. Like Francesca and
Yeah.
um,
So,
what's the other
yeah,
elf
um,
elf
Philavandrel.
maiden's name? Who?
Philavandrel.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will tell you that in Blood of Elves, there's a whole plot about how these fringe groups of elves are, the elves are like at war with the humans
Right.
basically. And so there's these fringe groups that, you know, everybody else calls the squirrels.
Okay.
And
I like it.
so these groups of elves are, going around the countrysides. Like if you play the games, you'll know like you're always coming up on these like groups of bandits on the road or you get attacked by whatever. Like that's basically what these these groups are doing, but it's more like guerrilla warfare
Right.
kind of. And um so there's this whole part of the book. It's a big part of the book where Geralt teaches Ciri about differences between the elves and the humans and witchers and how everybody's different and the history of the elves in that world and why there's a conflict. And it's really really touching from like a human geography, human empathy kind of perspective, and a teaching moment between Geralt and Ciri and world building. So there's this whole thing of like, and they have to fight them too. Geralt doesn't want to, but they're attacked, and so they have to. And so there's this whole plot, this whole subplot in the book
Right.
about the elves fighting. And so they've replaced that, or at least hinted at it, with this whole plot of bringing in Francesca Findabair a little bit earlier, and this whole plot of the baby, which was not a
There's a
thing.
lot of baby death in this show.
A
And
lot of baby death.
it's and any amount, to be fair, any amount of baby death is probably a lot of baby death, but there's been a dead baby in both seasons so far. um so
Yeah.
that's unfortunate.
Yeah, it is. But I also don't think you know, it's not gratuitous at all. It's just kind of,
I know it's just a thing that other shows don't
yeah.
have is baby
Just
baby
the
death.
difference. But yeah. So I can understand like how they kind of replaced the story that was in the books with the elves and played a little bit more into the political side of it from that standpoint this season, which comes in a little bit later in the books more with Francesca and etc. So they kind of just started that a little bit earlier, and I don't blame them for that either. I'm like, yeah, makes total sense. I can
Is
see where you're
there
going to go with that.
maybe I misunderstood. Was it just Francesca had been pregnant before and it didn't go to term, or was it like an elvish thing where they aren't able to have babies right now or something?
Just Francesca,
Okay.
but apparently there's they say in the season that there hasn't been a full-blooded elf born for
Yeah.
decades. And so
I mean, and
I'm a
that
little
just mean
confused
that
on that too.
they might be mixing with humans or what have you, but
Right. Like, I love this whole kind of very subtle commentary that they added about, identity and who you are
right.
with according to like your race in this world, which is so, you know, appropriate for our world too.
Absolutely.
But like Yennefer is, she's a quarter elf. And
Right.
we learned that in the first season.
And that's why
And
she was a hunchback, right? And it's because sometimes when
yeah,
you mix races, it doesn't work out quite right.
right. Yep. So she had a deformity from that. And I just thought it was really interesting how they use that as a commentary in this world of war, of social war, And so Yennefer tries to create a bond with her captors, with Filavandrel and Francesca, saying, I'm quarter elf, or I think she says half, maybe, and it exaggerates. Um, but they're just like, you're not an elf. Where are your ears?
Yeah, you don't
But
even
on
have
the
pointy
flip side,
ears.
yeah, but from the Brotherhood and the rest of the world, those that know she's a quarter elf, she's ousted. And then even when Yennefer meets up with Jaskier in season 2, he says, where the hell have you been? and she tells him that she's on the run. And he, it's not because she's an elf, it's because she's on the run from the Brotherhood,
Right.
right?
Because she just blew them all up and now they want her
Yeah.
to die. Yeah.
Yeah. And she's, on a quest to get her magic back. But Yaskier immediately assumes that it's because of her elvish blood, and he's like, of
Because
course.
everybody else
She's
is
an elf.
just trapping elves and killing elves and just nobody
Yeah.
likes the elves.
Yeah. And that's also a big part of The Witcher 3 is persecution of different groups of non-humans.
Which is completely irrelevant to the modern day.
Completely irrelevant. Oh, you the sarcasm. Anyway,
Yeah, so how did you like the season? I think I liked it better than the first season, but I don't think it's there yet. There's so much that I like about the show. I don't think it comes together. It's really messy. Um and
yeah.
I love the character work, but and I love the look of the monsters and the look of the world of it that we get to see. They spend a lot of time in the wild and not a lot
Mhm.
in cities or whatever. So I don't for example, I don't know or I don't feel like I know what elvish culture is really like. I can see how they dress. Um, but this beyond that, not
Yeah.
not really. Then there's the group of mages, like the magic hierarchy. I'm usually better with names
The
in
Brotherhood.
the this yeah. And they have their own way, and I like that
Yeah.
they're at least the casting of them is very diverse. Um,
Hmm.
but
Which I love.
they keep going.
Some people.
I'm all in for it. They keep going back to the Brotherhood, but I don't see why that we're spending so much time with the Brotherhood other than their relationship with Yennefer. We get a little bit of that, and then it's not really a thing anymore. And you have this new guy, Dykstra, who's played by Grant McTavish, who I adore, except he doesn't do anything. Like they set him up like he's supposed to be a big deal, and so I guess I just gotta wait for next season. That's it's just a little messy.
I
Um,
think I need to stop talking there
you're not
because
gonna. I don't worry about getting spoiled. You might. But yeah. So I liked it. I love Henry Cavill. I love who's the actress that plays Siri? You know,
Freya Allen.
Freya. Yes.
She's
And
lovely.
then Anya Chalotra plays
Love her.
Yennefer. Yeah, they're all amazing. And I really liked Vesemir. He's
Yeah.
my. I'm always on the
Kid
side of
Fabia.
the crotchety old man situation.
But he's not even crotchety. Like he's a badass,
It's
which
true.
I love.
Yeah. Um, and I really liked the relation, as we've talked about Eskel, and maybe Eskel wasn't handled the way that the fans would have liked, but it led to, Geralt had to kill Eskel, and Vesemir is kind of like a father figure to all the Witchers. And, so he had
Hmm.
to, it creates a little bit of friction between them. And ultimately they could, they both know it was the right thing to do, but
Yeah.
there's just an interesting dynamic between Vesemir and Geralt this season because he
Which,
basically had to kill one of his children, and it
yeah.
sucked.
Which is
But
interesting though.
yeah,
Conflict is story. So,
and that's
you know,
those dynamics are really interesting to me, and those are the parts of the show that I really liked. I
yeah.
don't feel like I know anything about how this world actually works, like in the grand scheme. I just know that there's a handful of people in it that I want to hang out with.
Well, I'm really glad because a lot of these characters are very larger than life, but feel so grounded in human problems
I totally
in
agree
the
with that.
games and the
Yes, and
books.
that's a difficult
And
line to walk, and I think that's what the show does well.
yeah,
To a degree, that's what Game of Thrones did well. Like Game of Thrones is dragons and war and all these big amazing things, but
yeah,
it's a character study ultimately, and it's a character study that takes place in a world that's so terrible that we can't imagine it, but that's what it
yeah,
is. And this is
yeah,
a character study in a different kind of place. Um,
yeah. I think that's a great way to describe the similarities because you can't deny that there is something that feels a little Game of Thronesy. Nothing's going to be Game of Thrones, but that grounding of character and an incomprehensible, fantastical world, I think, is what that is for The Witcher.
and
Um,
this this world has more like words in it, if that makes sense. It's like there's like more genre type stuff that you have to be able to keep up with, and there's
More jargon. Yeah.
yeah, and it's more high fantasy, I would say, than Game of Thrones. In Game of
Yeah.
Thrones we have dragons, but that's like the only kind. We have dragons and zombies, and those are the monsters. And in this we have
It's
all kinds of stuff. It's
yeah,
just
yeah. I think Game of Thrones, if you had to like kind of describe it other than fantasy, would be like historical fan fiction, you
I
know?
can see that. Yeah, absolutely.
Because it was totally inspired by, lots of like, like European and, worldwide history, but specifically the War of the Roses. It always goes back to the War of the Roses for Game of
Indeed.
Thrones. George R. R. Martin has said so. And I know that Andrei Sapkowski um, was also influenced by a lot of different cultures, and especially his Slavic culture. And I appreciate how they nod that into the writing for the series. I was reading something the other day where Lauren Hisrick was saying the Volithmir hut chicken hut thing, the basilisk leg hut thing is all based on the Baba Yaga stories.
Nice.
So I appreciate them putting that in there and taking the time to understand that and putting good nods and lines and straight up taking dialogue that's straight from the book into a situation that's close to the action of the book. I don't even
Okay.
mean action
Right.
because it's not like a lot is actually happening, but the events. So uh for instance, the dear friend letter that Geralt writes to Yennefer when he's like, I need your help. He starts off with dear friend, like they've had a whole history and broken up and she's mad at him, and she's like, you're gonna address me as dear friend, which is exactly what happens in season 2 of the series,
Mm-hmm.
but just in a different way. It's not in a
Right.
letter. And I appreciate
And
that.
isn't
That is
there's something
adaptation.
like either it's true or it's a story that's told about them, but like Witchers can't love, right? That's like a and it's there. I feel like there's a little bit of awkwardness with Geralt. Like he doesn't, he obviously loves Ciri, but he almost doesn't know how, and he has feelings for Yennefer that are very, very deep, but he can't express them, certainly to anyone else who's not Yennefer. So it's like,
It's propaganda.
that seems like that was the case because they're Witchers need to be scary, like they need to be they're they're monster hunters, and they need to be the
Yeah,
presence of a Witcher should command respect. Um,
it it
yeah,
should, but it doesn't always. And that whole they don't feel anything kind of backfires on them from that standpoint. But the whole Witchers don't feel emotions thing is really a great economic tool for them to like get paid better.
and that makes total sense.
It's genius.
It's always toss a coin to your Witcher, but
But
yeah,
it's
it's
also
just
a good point for, them to be treated as other. It comes up all the time from people that aren't Witchers in this world. They go, Witchers don't have feelings, so I can treat you however I want, you know? And that's
and
not
that's terrible.
okay. Yeah,
I don't want to say like there, hmm,
it's
I,
interesting.
yes, and Witchers are mutants. They have been
Yeah,
biologically and alchemically mutated.
literally.
Yeah, using potion and some kind of magical means.
Yep.
So this is what they're stronger than humans. They live longer than humans,
Yep.
but they were still born human.
Yep.
So whether or not it was their choice, and is it addressed in the show? Did Geralt choose to be a Witcher?
He did not.
Okay, I didn't think so. Yeah, so that was
They it's not sorry, I just bumped my mic. It's not common for anybody to choose to be a Witcher. Have you seen the anime movie about Vesemir, Nightmare of the Wolf, that Netflix put out?
no. I had forgotten that was
Definitely
a
take a
thing, so I
watch of
should check
that.
it out. Okay,
Definitely watch that. And in that, it's not a spoiler. I mean, it literally propels. It's like the inciting incident of the thing is that uh Vesemir chooses to be a Witcher. He's one of the very few that has actually chosen that path, and he had his reasons. But traditionally speaking, no, it's not a choice at all. Sometimes Though that kid snatching, witchers get a reputation for kid snatching because of that long
Yeah,
surprise. But when that happens, if it's a boy, they'll bring it back to Kaer Morhen. That's why Geralt doesn't know what else to do with Ciri. It's because, you know, if it was
there's
a
a
boy, he'd take him to Kaer Morhen and train him.
seems like there's like almost a parallel to do you know anything about Halo?
No, sorry.
Well, it's a video game you should play, but also in Halo, you know the Master Chief is a they call them Spartans, which is a historical thing, but he's a super soldier that was trained from very young, one of many.
Hmm.
And they modify them at a young age,
Hmm.
to make them superhuman to a degree, and they but the the set of Spartans that Master Chief is from, which is the second wave of Spartans, the first one that kind of makes them what they are really.
Hmm.
Um, they were kidnapped at when they were 10 years old, to 10, 11 or so, and replaced with clones. And in this universe, clones are unstable. So, like, all these hundreds of parents had children that everything seemed fine. And then people broke into their house at night, stole their child, and replaced it with a short lived clone. And then,
Hey,
so all these parents, their children just die inexplicably, basically,
that sounds
while
like
they're,
some fairy
while
mythology
they're
right there.
yeah, it's terrible. And then their children grow up to become super soldiers, at least the ones that survive the process.
Hmm.
So yeah, and
That's
that's
very
a
similar.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it sounds like he sounds
Yeah.
like a Spartan.
The trial
um,
of the grasses to become a witcher. That's the whole process of being mutated. Trial of the grasses. It's literally not a lot of them survive. So they can train and be tortured and starved and trained.
so the
And
the Spartans are trained from the day they're captured for several
mhm,
years, and then in their late teens they go
yep,
through a surgical augmentation process
yep,
that most of them most of them survive, but less than half of them are successful, and the rest are crippled for life.
yeah. I'm
So
sorry if you're
it's
hearing
terrible.
all this bumping. It's my
It's all good.
neighbors upstairs. It's an issue.
Are you
Anyway,
using live speakers?
no.
Because I think I hear me
Oh
in my
yes,
phone.
yes, yes, yes,
Yeah, yeah.
yes. A little bit.
No worries. It's not bad.
Um, yeah,
Yeah. So I
limitations
I
of
keep
this.
I keep trying to ask you, and then describing how I feel about things. So tell me, you're as a reader and gamer, and also just a fan of good TV. Like, how
Mhm.
did you feel about The Witcher season 2, and how do you think it compares to the first season?
Well, first of all, I could talk about it all day long, so this is totally fine
No worries.
because there's just so much lore to cover. But as so first I'll start from like purely a film studies kind of critical perspective. I like the series. It's not as strong as I would have wanted it to be.
I
I
agree
think
with that.
I think it starts off really good and we start getting into some really interesting plot points and elements and they could build it up so much, but I think that the beast of tackling all of this lore and content is a challenge. And so I think that in trying to weave in the essence of the book, and like I'm totally fine, I'll get into it later with my fan approach, but I'm fine with that. I'm fine with how they adapted it. But just from a writing standpoint, I think they just had so much to cover that it got a little inundated with miscellaneous bits. And I think maybe at sometimes there was a little too much going on to
I felt
really
that way about the
appreciate.
first season for sure.
Interesting. Because I thought the first season, first of all, even if they did it chronologically, it wouldn't have worked. I'll just tell you that right now. It
Noted.
wouldn't have, because then you would just open with a bunch of Yennefer, and then you would get some Geralt, and then we would finally get into the serious
And
stuff, and
that
it would
was
be oh, you're
and then I muted it. It has
yeah.
a touch sensitive mute thing on the top, and then I hit it, and I was like, oh, then anyway, awkward. Yes, and I read that the a big reason that it was cut the way it was is because Yennefer's transformation happens
Yennefer's
before
old.
most of the stuff with Geralt, so we
Yeah.
wouldn't have The Witcher in the first 3 episodes of The Witcher.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that, that seems like a problem.
So like could they have probably in the first season added in some more indicators that more outright told you this is how you need to read what's going on? Yes, they could have. Did I pick up on them my first watch through of it? Yes, because I've been trained to do that, you know? I know when to listen and put things together and what evidentiary
Evidentiary.
thank you. What that kind of editing does is suggestive. If they talk about one thing at one point, like, and then cut to something else, that's references what they were just talking about.
Often there is a reason that the thing that you're watching now
Yeah.
comes right after the thing you just saw.
For instance, and I is it the first episode? What's her name? The evil princess, Renfrey.
Renfrey, yeah.
Renfrey says Queen Calanthe just won her first battle at something. But we know that Calanthe is battling Nilfgaard, like in Calanthe's timeline of the first season, in the first episode. And then so she says that, and then the next scene immediately cuts to Sintra and Calanthe in war talk with Nilfgaard. There's a reason. That's evidentiary editing. So I got it. I can understand how people wouldn't. I thought that, in my opinion, I thought the timeline and the storytelling of the first season was better. I think it was. It wasn't as messy to me. It was much more
And that
linear.
this season is definitely messy.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think the first season had clear goals, whereas this season not so much.
This
And
season feels really preoccupied with what comes next than what
yeah.
it's actually talking about.
And it does set up a lot of stuff, and I think that's okay. I think it's okay to set up stuff as long as it doesn't detract, which unfortunately I think it detracted from some of the story of this season. So I think that really just comes from they had a lot to put in there. They had a really difficult task of adapting a book where nothing really happens. Like
And
important
that's
things
interesting
happen
because
to get people from point.
this is the first novel, right?
Right.
So
People
this
got
is
to
the
get from
story
point
that's supposed
A.
to hook people.
Yeah, exactly. You got to bring them in. So they did that. You're in. Know, you're invested in it. You got to know more. But I think that they were trying to do perhaps a little bit too much story wise, that they lost some of the spark, no pun intended at all, from the first season. Like I also didn't think that there was enough like fight choreography or really interesting.
I feel like there was a lot more, or a lot sorry, a lot less this year of like
Yeah.
Geralt fighting monsters, which is kind of what I expected the focus to be going in before having watched anything.
Yeah.
But
Or
also
if
the
there
first season
is.
I felt was very monster of the week, which was at time kind of annoying. I don't, I don't want to be at 35 minutes of every episode. He's gonna fight this week's monster, and then he'll see something new. That kind of shit annoys me. That's very, very old school TV, and it doesn't need to exist anymore.
Yeah. Well, I understand, but I also think it's very accurate to the world of The Witcher. And they did it in different ways in the first season that it didn't annoy me quite as much. Did I pick up on it? Yes. Did it annoy me as much as you? No. And that's okay. But in episode 1, season 1, that fight where he gets the moniker the Butcher of Blaviken and he fights Renfrey's gang and then he fights Renfrey, that is absolute pure stunt choreography genius. It's wonderful and it's beautiful. The cinematography is beautiful. And even the Striga fight in season 1 is so well choreographed and it's really embedded in the story. It's not just there to have a fight scene, which is how I feel about the Ryance fight with Geralt in Neneka's temple in the second season. It just felt like they had to have a fight, so they put a fight in there. Season 1 action felt much more embedded in the story, and I thought it was done much more artfully than season 2. So I was missing that in season 2. But as a fan, I totally understand how they came into the adaptation process. I think they nodded to things they needed to nod to appropriately. I think the design was really um, well done from a standpoint of fan service, but also function. And I think that as a fan, I'm excited to see what they're going to do with it next, especially knowing that they will address their criticism. They want to hear it so they can like make the fans more a part of the process, because they care about it so much as fans. Mike's not on.
That's cool. Maybe I'm on the pretentious side, but like fans aren't writers. I appreciate fans giving feedback and saying what they want to see.
Yes.
Writers should decide that if what the fans want to see is the right decision or not. Um,
And I
I
think that's where they've been going with that. And I think that's done really well. And I think the input conversation part of it is really on the hands of the showrunner Lauren Hisrick and a little bit of Henry Cavill too. But Hisrick is very vocal about explaining the process
right.
and those things, which I think is really good engagement. So I think they've towed that line well, because I agree with you. Fans are not writers by any means, and they shouldn't be. But there is something to be said for listening to your fan base and
Yeah.
acknowledging that input.
The
And
my
so
my
they've done that.
concern is, this is how you end up with the Rise of Skywalker. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's a thing. So yeah, I do want to touch on one small thing that you mentioned about choreography.
Mm-hmm.
My brother in law is a big fan of the show, and he said something like in the first season he felt like there was more, just like it's Geralt is just like a burly guy with a sword, and he fights with a sword. And in this one, there's a lot of like he uses magic a lot more in almost like get out of jail ways. He always does the magic shield and that kind of shit. So it's
Yeah. That's kind of like a nod to the games too, though. That's the
yeah,
Quen. And so you could literally just all of the gameplay that I've seen and all the videos I've watched, and even myself, you just go around and you can just like Quen all around the place and just, just like spam the Quen sign. And it's hilarious. Like, but on the other side of that, that would be like walking around using the Igni sign, which is the fire,
right.
So it's like Geralt, you can't like if they're gonna have him just like use that as a default so much, like plays up something else too. I get that. That's kind of like how I mean, we're not talking about the Matrix now, but we were talking about it.
Right.
And
In the new movie, there's a lot of like he throws up
yeah,
his hands and something bounces off, and he he does that like with a less special effectsy version of it in like the Matrix sequels. Like
yeah,
even in the first Matrix, he does the thing where he stops the bullets,
yeah.
right? Um,
But
and
he just like
there's
spams it in the new one.
yeah, it's just constant. Just this
And
is
I can see how you would get that feeling from the magic in the second season of The Witcher as well. But I also feel like it's game appropriate, but this isn't a game. So I think they were trying to explore it more, which I think is okay. If you
well, I
know what
mean,
you're
and
looking
it
for
time
now,
time has passed. He's probably better at using magic than he was before. But
yeah.
no, it was just your
Um,
point about the fight choreography. There's more of him standing still using magic than there
yeah.
was previously.
I will say though that if you go back and watch season 1 now, you will see that he does use his signs and his magic quite a lot.
Okay.
And so, but now that you know that that's what it is, then you'll see it. Uh, so I would just say they definitely used it in season 1, but it became much more visible and prevalent in season 2. Um, and yeah, it kind of does become a default. Um, but I also think that's okay because a Witcher is not just a swordsman.
Right.
He's also
He's
he can
he's
use
all
the
kinds of
Witcher
stuff, and
signs.
and the shields are always welcome.
The
If
shields are always welcome. Yep. I mean, that's why Witchers don't carry a shield,
right, and it's funny. The is it probably How to Train Your Dragon. Like, if you ever have to pick your weapon or your shield, you always keep the shield. Unless you got a magic shield, I guess. But
Exactly. So yeah, I mean, I appreciate that perspective for sure. I mean, your brother-in-law, he's totally right.
yeah, yeah, he pointed it out, and then at that point, I hadn't finished the season, so last few episodes I watched, like, no, yeah, he's using a lot of magic and a lot of like force shields and force
Magic.
pushes and that kind of shit. Um,
Yeah.
Anywho, I think that's a good place. We're coming up on an hour and a half, so that's probably a good place to wrap up. It was.
Yeah.
I like the show. I don't love the show. I love Henry Cavill and Siri, and I want more of them.
And Yaskir and Yennefer. Just gonna
Yes,
say
yes. They should just be like a traveling family, and they should kill all the monsters and start all the fires.
and Yaskir will just,
Yeah, just
he'll play the jam out music. It'll be good. I have to add Yen in there too. Oh, and Triss. Triss is great, but Yen's my girl always. I was actually Yennefer for Halloween this year, so
excellent. I like it.
that's how I feel about that. That's my girl. Um,
Um, so yeah, thanks for joining me, Katie.
thank
Um,
you.
and thanks for watching, everybody. If you be sure to hit that subscribe button if you like what you see. I try to do this once a week. Don't always get there. Have an episode probably next week coming up about the Matrix Resurrections that we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. Um, and other than that, just Happy New Year. Everybody stay safe, stay healthy, and thanks for watching.